clear that the Mediterranean diet, or rather the definition of it, has been hijacked.
The current dietary advice in the UK to be consuming 22 teaspoons of sugar a day.
What about the sustainability of...
I don't think it is that difficult.
The biggest culprits in this whole problem.
But the definition of a poor diet has been sorely
Very
misunderstood.
powerful companies both within the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry.
We've realised that it's what you put in your mouth that's more important than how much exercise you're doing.
Yeah.
Now we're up against the sugar, the food, the wheat.
Hold on, what I would say is
People who are still fat and they exercise, they're in great health.
over 60% of the UK population are overweight or obese. In the United States, the figures are similar. In Australia, this is a global problem.
We're off to Naples Airport to collect Dr. Asim Malhotra, who's a young British cardiologist, and he's been making a lot of waves in this space. He's a big supporter of the Mediterranean diet.
The dietary guidelines, in my view, are wrong. They've been wrong for decades.
Everywhere you go in the Western world, it's become almost impossible to avoid cheap, sugary processed foods.
As a cardiologist, I see seriously ill patients every day. I think what we eat and how we live is killing us. And I've been campaigning strenuously to counteract an epidemic of misinformed doctors and misinformed patients. Something, somewhere, has gone very badly wrong. I'm joining Donal O'Neill, the producer of Serial Killers, in the southern Italian village of Pioppi. If a traditional Mediterranean diet is the benchmark for nutritional guidelines, then this is where it all began.
For us, it's very important to explain to the other part of the world that in Italy, in Campania region, in province of Salerno, in Cilento, in Pollica, we have a treasure.
It strikes me, it's not just about the food, there's an awful lot more, because the message that the world understands is just diet.
In the ancient Greek used the word diet to explain lifestyle. Diet was the lifestyle of Mediterranean. And we put in the lifestyle the landscape, sea, quality of life, culture, and many other things. And now Pollica and Cilento is very important for the future of Mediterranean lifestyle.
Pretty hard to believe that nobody has heard of Pioppi around here, even the lady at the airport.
Yeah, I mean, it's astonishing considering there's so much history in this place, especially with the roots of the Mediterranean diet.
If we have been misinformed about the principles of the Mediterranean diet, I'm wondering what else may have been left behind. Is that treasure Stefano referred to really still here? And if so, what is it?
And this is typical from this area, just from this area. Mozzarella nel mirto.
Ansel Keys, the architect of the Mediterranean diet, conducted much of his original research from Pioppi. Antonio's father, Angelo, was his driver, and the family came to know him well.
We're above Ansel Keys' house here, Asim, and you can see, he's right on the water, and he's got the 12 villas for the scientists next door. It must have been an amazing experience for anyone to come here and spend time and get involved in that work.
He was here 6 months years for 35, 40 years.
He come here and stay 6 months and go back?
Yeah.
Wow.
My grandpa understands these people is important.
Sure.
He told me, if you want to do a home in this place, I give the land to do.
To build a house.
Yeah, to build a house.
This is some picture from my family book.
My mom and my father.
Their wedding day.
Yeah, wedding day.
wow.
Okay.
What year was this, Antonio?
Or 74. 74.
That's when Ansel Keys was at the height of his fame, really.
This is Grandpa, my grandpa. This is at the end of Christmas Day. My father and Professor Keys do salute, chin, salute. My grandpa is the
Best friend.
one friend, not more. The best friend in absolutely in Italy. I don't know in other part of the world.
This part of the museum is dedicated to Ansel Keys and the Mediterranean diet. And here there is a photograph of Ansel Keys with his wife Margaret. That was the last time he came over to Italy because they had to sell the house. He was 96 at the time. He lived to be 100. He died in 2004 after he celebrated his 100th birthday.
Keys would become famous for his demonizing stance on saturated fat and cholesterol, a legacy echoed in my own training as a cardiologist even 30 years later. As the fat versus sugar debate had raged into the 1970s, Keys had focused on winning that debate, sometimes forcefully. He rejected claims that sugar could be responsible for heart disease, and although later studies would demonstrate the clear danger of sugar consumption, Keys did not study it in the context of a Mediterranean diet. As the lifestyle factors he experienced and referenced were diluted out of the equation, a loose, politically motivated interpretation of his views on saturated fat led to increased consumption of polyunsaturated vegetable oils, trans fats, low-fat foods, and refined carbohydrates. The consequences have been devastating.
You can see here there's the pyramid of the Mediterranean diet.
Here. This is really interesting because this isn't really what we've been experiencing. At the base of the food pyramid here is really starchy carbohydrates, bread, white pasta, which actually, in my view, is actually driving the obesity and type 2 diabetes epidemic.
Well, although they say this is the original food pyramid, I don't think it was actually Ansel Keys who designed it. I think it was done after him, based on his work.
Absolutely. The base of the food pyramid actually should be vegetables, olive oil, oily fish.
And this is the library of the Mediterranean diet. This is Ansel Keys' private collection. When he sold his house, he couldn't take the books back with him, and he left them all to the museum. So you can see there's a variety of books. Most of them are about food and cooking. I can see a book here about Crete, which is one of the 7 countries studied. Italian food, Greek cookery. You can see the many different titles, but most of them are connected with his work.
I've been researching Ansel Keys and the diet for about 5 years now.
Yes.
And it's unknown that later in his life he actually tried to publish a paper which, let's say, redirected some of his earlier work. He had become concerned at how his work had been interpreted.
Yes.
And he was in his late 80s at the time.
Yes.
And Dr. Stephen Finney in the US had met him.
Yes.
And Ansel Keys produced a paper and said he was furious that he could not get this published because his work had been misinterpreted.
He reached into his briefcase and took out a manuscript. He said, look at this manuscript. It's been refused by the New England Journal, JAMA, Archives of Internal Medicine. He said, in here I show that yes, HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol, is a predictor of whether people are going to have a heart attack. But it's not a predictor of how long they live. That there's no difference in mortality between the high HDL and the low HDL groups 30 years later. They both have the same mortality. It's just the ones with the high HDL had fewer heart attacks and died of other causes instead. He said, I can't get this paper published. And he was furious. But maybe a little too late. But he started this in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. But by the 1980s, he realized that the juggernaut had gone off the tracks. But he couldn't do anything about it.
What Ansel Keys was saying about the Mediterranean diet is it's not just the foods that you eat, but it's the whole lifestyle. And everything's integrated, that it's good for you, but it should also be a pleasure to eat the Mediterranean diet. In fact, the 3 principles of the Mediterranean diet, benessere is the well-being, the health. Piacere is the pleasure of eating, and cultura is the culture, the traditions of the area. I think one of the key things of the Mediterranean diet is the variety of food.
Yes, sure.
That nothing is restricted too much. You just eat in a more natural way.
And lots of vegetables, clearly, and some fruit.
In my family, we're not eating a lot of meat.
Okay.
The almost we eating is veg.
A lot of vegetables.
Yes,
yeah.
a lot of vegetables.
Yeah.
People still eat the foods that are in season, so the vegetables and fruit of the season, usually locally produced. There's very little in the way of ready-produced meals.
Absolutely.
Yes. And another interesting thing is the oily fish, which I think now would be further down on the pyramid because they recommend you should eat a lot. You can eat a lot of the oily fish.
And there's very good evidence behind consuming oily fish as being anti-inflammatory, reducing heart attack and stroke risk.
Is that because of the omega-3s?
Absolutely. Omega-3 is anti-inflammatory and it stabilizes what we call coronary plaques, that reduces the risk of clotting of coronary arteries.
Well, pretty much, but then it was
It's a local fish?
Yes, it's a deep fish. It's sure not farm fish. They serve downstairs the potato and top the fish, so you can see the fish. Because look the meat was white of this fish. It's really white. Extra olive oil. Always the white is different.
Fantastic.
It's funny, we always joke about the aphrodisiacal quality of seafood and shellfish, but it's no joke really, is it?
Well, what's interesting is that the evidence tells us that men who have sex at least twice a week are 45% less likely to suffer from heart disease compared to men who have sex once a month. And it's probably in a combination of factors, the physical benefits, the emotional benefits, but also the stress reduction.
And what can happen? I mean, you get a middle-aged man. I mean, how does one become aware of sexual dysfunction?
Well, it can often present a marker of vascular disease, if you like, or disease of the arteries, can often manifest itself with middle-aged men actually losing libido, but also getting impotent, having difficulty actually getting and sustaining an erection. And that can be a marker of vascular disease. So it's really important that men understand if they have these issues or situations that they need to consult their doctor. And certainly it would be important to look into risk factors for heart disease and to see whether that may be causing it. Type 2 diabetes is a big risk factor. High blood pressure, for example, is a big risk factor.
What about just popping a little blue pill? That'll keep going.
Well, unfortunately, pills have side effects, they have costs. If I had a choice personally, Donal, between taking a pill and eating a food that's going to help me sustain my virility, if you like, I would choose food any day of the week.
And what about things like white bread and pasta? Is that something that's always there, or only occasionally you have a little bit?
We stop at the first course. So with pasta, we stop.
Okay.
We not have a second course.
Yeah.
We like eating antipasti with the veggie, a little bit of salami, cheese, and maybe in the last time the people eating more bread than before.
Traditionally, how often would pizza have been eaten when you were a child?
Oh, when my grandma do the bread, it's the opportunity to eating the pizza. Normally it's 2 times at a month, 1 time at a month. So all family is in the stuff because somebody prepare the basic. My mom prepares sauce. The child go in the garden to take the fresh basil. It's a day of festa in Italy. It's a party.
They did enjoy some bread. We know they cooked it once a month, but we also know that wheat was re-engineered in the early 1970s, and the man who did that won the Nobel Prize because they saved many, many lives with their ability to produce a multiple of output per acreage. And unfortunately, big food came in over the fence, reached in and took the modern wheat as their own. So the type of wheat that would have been enjoyed here in the bread and the pasta back in Ansel Keys' time is no longer commercially available. So I think I know how to make this the perfect meal.
Tell me.
Just put that over there.
I think that's a very good idea.
And let's put that centre stage. Boom. Job done. They told us to stock up on vegetable oils and whatnot. I mean, this has been cooked in olive oil.
Yeah.
There's olive oil on the table. Seems to be the one food that spans right across all of the Mediterranean regions.
Absolutely.
We use extra virgin olive oil.
Right.
Yeah, almost all people have olive trees and they produce olive oils.
Yeah.
Is this from your trees?
Yeah.
Of course, it's very difficult to replicate the quality of the produce here, but one thing that we can get anywhere in the world is quality extra virgin olive oil.
People don't appreciate, actually, it is relatively cheap as a food. And we know from data that consumption of at least 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil per day, which is about 500 calories, and I admit to probably consuming much more than that myself daily, significantly reduces the risk of one developing a heart attack, stroke, or even death in a short space of time.
So if that was a medicine, it would probably be much more expensive.
Absolutely.
This is a special place for the weather, for the wine and for the vineyard is a very good combination. Also the exposition to the sea.
And do you use, in the soil, do you use chemicals and fertilizers, or is it quite a natural way?
No, we are in a very natural place, so it's not necessary to use it. And do you know slow food?
Yes.
We love this kind of philosophy.
Yeah.
And it's been our philosophy until the beginning.
I think for people to really experience a true Mediterranean diet, they must come to this place, because it's very difficult to find wine of this quality.
Yes.
It's coming from.
In Italy, the people say that 1 glass of red wine all the day is the way for the heaven, anyway, to stay better until you became very old.
In terms of dessert, sugar, that kind of thing, how often, I mean, is that something that's part of the meal always, that families would have dessert after meals, or not necessarily? No?
No, just in the Sunday time. My mom, when he was in visit to friends of my grandpa or grandma, my mom take a sugar box and a sugar coffee for present.
Right.
Because 30 years ago, the sugar and the coffee as rich stuff. It's not something cheap.
No,
so
sure.
it's you give something important for present of the family, not because they can buy.
So it used to be considered kind of a rare thing that people would have, so it was a gift to bring sugar in.
Yeah. You asked me about the dessert in Chile.
Okay.
This is typical.
So what is it made of? What's it?
There is a couple of desserts typical in this area. This is the most famous. The name is cannuolo. The shell is made with olive oil, and after put inside cream, chocolate cream, and vanilla cream, homemade, absolutely homemade. This is.
Any sugar?
That is a lot of sugar. But one time at years.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Let's say just for holiday, for important day.
Only for, okay, so
just for
special
holiday
occasion.
day. Special occasion, not every day you can find. I prefer the white cream. And the other part is chocolate.
Wow. It's not sweet. Not very sweet though.
No. We talk about sweet. Never is so sweet.
No.
Like American.
No, not at all. There must be just a little bit of sugar, I think, where you can...
The sugar you need.
But it's good that, it's cooked in, what I like about this is the fact that, the health, we know that olive oil is like a medicine, and even the dessert has been cooked in olive oil.
coffee is this size, and you look around you and the conversation is this size, but when we run into a Starbucks for a coffee, the coffee's this size, the conversation is like this. Here, it's very much a social event when they sit down to have a coffee, so it goes right to the heart of the stress issue again. I mean, everything they do seems to be relaxed and mindful. The goat's cheese, it was always here in this area?
Yeah, it's typical. It's slow food protection too. Okay? They put maybe 20% of normal milk inside because the goat, it's really strong and hard. Really smell.
Yeah. So the slow food movement seems to be very strong here.
Yeah.
Everybody...
Yeah, you know, in Italy too. In South Italy, yes. They're moving around the world to save the particular food.
It's really...
One of the other things that I found really interesting was learning that the traditional people of the Mediterranean, they didn't eat 3 meals a day. You know, sometimes they had to actually go to work without food because there wasn't any.
Yeah.
So they were fasting.
Yes.
It wasn't planned.
No.
And we now know that fasting is a very powerful intervention.
Some great work by Jason Fung in the United States in relation to intermittent fasting, specifically for people with type 2 diabetes, that can be a very powerful tool to reduce insulin resistance and help people control their blood glucose levels.
And of course, this diet comes from hard times of poverty, when people couldn't buy things, they had to live that way. And yet it turns out that that was the ideal way to live. So that's very much a part of it, the family all eating together and people spending time to cook and to eat well.
Asim, I'm really curious on your thoughts regarding vitamin D.
What people need to understand is that sunlight is essential and a very important factor in body's synthesis of vitamin D that helps maintain bone integrity. But also what's interesting is that recent research has shown that vitamin D deficiency is associated with heart disease. And being outdoors is clearly beneficial, especially if you're being active. And we found that, certainly in this region, a lot of their traditional lifestyle was spent outdoors, and that's where they did their activity.
Do you see much evidence of, you've been here 25 years, of
Yes.
people exercising?
No, very little.
One of the really interesting things that Stefano mentioned, Asim, was the fact that the work was a traditional part of this culture that they refer to in the Mediterranean diet as a whole. And these people were poor people who were working in fields like this, so they would have been walking for miles. And one of the jokes they make here is about the chopping of wood, that hard manual work they did in the field. But the joke's on us, we don't do that anymore.
What can I do to exercise more effectively?
Well, it's a great question with a relatively short answer. You can learn to move well. Mobility is hugely important. You can learn to exercise smarter, and you can learn to listen to your body. And if you do those 3 things, you'll find that you get much more effective results than going to a gym and knocking out 5 kilometers 3 times a week. Fittest cardiologist in the UK right here. Lovely, lovely, lovely.
Nothing like me running on a treadmill. Much harder, much harder.
The pulse is maxed out at this stage. We got lactic acid running right throughout the body. There's no let up, and he's nearly there. He's nearly there.
People undergoing stress testing for heart disease, what we want them to do is to get to 80% of their target heart rate, which is 220 minus their age, and then 80% of that, to get enough exercise that's supposed to trigger ischemia or reduction in coronary blood flow to the heart muscle under stress.
much sign of stress around here, I see.
No, it's a very calming, serene environment, isn't it? And it's very interesting because there's no doubt that reduction in stress actually can have tremendous health benefits. We know that it reduces the risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes. There's biological evidence that it reduces inflammatory markers in the blood. But what's most interesting is that recent evidence is also telling us that reduction in stress, even in middle age, can actually impact upon genes that control the aging process.
And of course, in Ansel Keys' original work, he incorporated the Mediterranean lifestyle and the culture, and the absence of stress was a big part of that.
Absolutely. People focus just on the diet, but actually there's a whole lifestyle aspect to the Mediterranean way of living. And reduction in stress, or living in a relatively stress-free environment, has a big impact upon one's health.
And the question is, and the challenge is, how do you export it? How do you bring all of this back to London or New York or LA? What we got to do in the next 21 days is rehabilitate and redefine the Mediterranean diet, because we know it was a lifestyle.
I think that's absolutely crucial. Within 21 days, we're going to wind back the epidemic of misinformation that exists around diet, health, and lifestyle.
So we've just run into the morning traffic here. I mean, major factor for most people. Every day they do this, going to work, coming back. So it's one thing to talk about a Mediterranean lifestyle.
One of the issues with the modern urban environment is people spending a lot of times at desks and sitting for prolonged periods. And, you know, if sugar is the new tobacco, then sitting is the new smoking.
But people are going to say, I'm sat at the office all day, I'm sitting in traffic, there's nothing I can do. And yet the research is showing if we get up and move around, even very briefly, every 45 minutes to 1 hour, that's a superior strategy to combat sitting in the office all day than sitting in the office all day and hopping along to the gym or going for a 10-kilometre run.
The problem we have is this box culture. You know, we're driving to work in a box, we live in a box, we're watching a box, and we're now even eating out of a box. You know what? It's time to think out of the box.
As a teenager and a developing athlete, my ambition was to be the first Irishman to jump 7 feet. I was well on my way when injury struck. I was told when I was 18 I had the back of a 65-year-old man. There were days when I couldn't tie my own laces, but after 15 years of chronic pain and impaired mobility, I found a fix by immersing myself in the practice of Pilates, Tai Chi and mindful movement. My back and my body feels young again. As we age, mobility can be an asset or a silent assassin. We do have a choice.
The key is, how do we meet life stresses today in a relaxed manner?
These days, going to work is like going to war.
The essence of our teachings that we're trying to pass on actually comes from the battlefield hundreds of years ago. And these were taken from elite warriors. And they learned how to, besides having supreme skill, they learned how to stay deeply relaxed while meeting an offender, someone really trying to take your life. And the key was really how to stay deeply relaxed and be creative. And this we need to take into life today.
As a scientist, I don't like talking about stress because that's almost like a psychological term. We talk about the sympathetic nervous system because you can measure the sympathetic nervous system. It's like the signal going down that nerve, and you can see it's more active or less active.
Laurie, how did you find your way, or what was your journey to the remarkable work that you're conducting today?
I only got into brain research after I was involved in a crippling road accident. This happened about 17 years ago while I was out training for the South African Triathlon Championships. I had a brain injury, or got a brain injury, spinal cord injury. I got a missing leg. So every time I got up to walk, it was very stressful. So I had to learn to manage my stress in order to walk. So the key is to stop thinking.
How did you stop thinking?
It's not easy to not think, but the best way not to think is to focus on your posture. I mean, a simple thing like just with parallel feet, hips, shoulders, eyes, all in line, walking forward.
If you move correctly, it allows a state of deep relaxation.
The scientific research shows that if your posture is correct, your sympathetic activation will be lower, means your heart rate will be lower, you'll be more relaxed. And that's very good for the body.
Asim's structure is showing the effects of too much sitting. In the next 21 days, I will guide him back into his body to provide the foundation for safe, fluid, and effective movement. This innate ability for good posture resides in all of us. We're going to start by mobilizing your skeleton and just getting your internal framework kind of realigned and restored. Posture is aligning your central nervous system, putting your head on top of your heart, on top of your pelvis, and then on top of your locomotion, your knees, your ankles, and your feet. Why do we need to stack these body parts? Well, it's a computer, and the wires are set in a very, very specific way. So if we disturb that alignment, we disturb everything. Folding the right leg up, stirring into your hip socket. Many of us think of posture as something pretty static. It's not. It's about communication of that nervous system, head, heart, pelvis, knees, ankles, feet. And sit onto the chair and back up. You can pull on me more. Our sympathetic nervous system in today's world is on 24/7. It was made for our fight and flight response, which is to get us away from a dangerous or stressful environment. And we're seeing our everyday environment as stressful. So those flight and fight hormones are not being used. They're sitting in our body, disturbing our homeostasis. Exercise gets rid of them. Your boss is stressing you out. Get up, do some squats, hang on the door, do a few squats, get the circulation going, get rid of those stress hormones. After just 1 hour of specific mobility and stability training, Asim's joints are more safely aligned to bear the weight of higher intensity exercise.
Breathing is very important because your heart typically follows your breath. But the key thing with breathing is your breathing follows your movement. If your structure is correct and you're moving properly, your breathing will be correct, deep diaphragmatic breathing, slower breathing, and that affects your heart rate variability. And that's very heart healthy, because if your heart rate variability goes up, it's very good for cardiac health.
You can only breathe correctly if you move naturally. So you neutralize stresses from the upper body. So this creates, again, a fluid movement. So in the big picture, it's learning how to be fluid with the body from foot to head. So you'll notice the turn in the upper body. The feet stay parallel. And this is the essence of the teachings. The energy actually comes from the foot, expressed in the fingers.
Movement heals. Every time you move, you floss your nerves. Every time you move, you massage your internal organs. Every time you move, you circulate blood around your body. Every time you move, you experience real sensation. I use walking to sort out my posture.
Right.
So think of the head, over the heart, over the pelvis, and then we've got to find that calf pump in the feet. So let's let the feet, the knees, and the hips be our wheels. So we really have to get those cogs turning. So they're not only your support, they're your propulsion.
That's good. Focusing on the legs and, just actually thinking a little bit about the walking.
rather than just dragging my feet, you know?
Absolutely. I feel it all the way up my back line.
Yeah. And it feels like a real activity, a real exercise.
The average active person is probably going to hit 3 million plus steps a year. I see. That includes you. So footwear has to play a very important role in that, and modern footwear can be pretty damaging in many respects.
Your traditional shoe last would look something like this. And this is actually where the problems begin. Your typical last is designed to have a heel or quite a high toe spring on it. And what that actually does, it positions your body in a very incorrect stance for good movement. I wanted to mimic the barefoot experience, but still retain, the beauty of a luxurious leather shoe. The idea is that it promotes A, good footfall, and B, correct movement. We've actually started with a foot. No footfall, so there is 0 drop on the heel and on the toe spring. Thereafter, I started working on the aesthetics of Birthfoot. Birthfoot is made from A-grade veg tan leather. It's the best leather on the market. It's a chemical-free tanning process, and chestnut bark tannins are used to create the leather, rather than chromium, formaldehyde, heavy metals, and cancerous toxins. The shoe will respond to your foot, and not the other way around. The earth is generating energy, and your average rubber sole stops your body charging and making use of that energy.
When I was at medical school, Donal, I do not remember getting one single lecture on the impact of lifestyle and nutrition, in particular on health.
Wow. And what's your view on that now?
Well, most of what I've learned, I've been looking at research, and only in the last few years, many years after qualifying as a doctor, and realizing that actually lifestyle and nutrition is the biggest factor driving cardiovascular disease, which is extraordinary. Heart disease is any pathological process that affects the heart as an organ. But more specifically, it is synonymous with coronary artery disease. This is a disease that affects the blood vessels that supply the heart muscle with blood.
Is there any difference between cardiac arrest and a heart attack, or are they the same thing?
There is a difference, and it's an important difference. Cardiac arrest essentially means when the heart stops beating. It's the last thing that happens before you die. Whereas heart attack is much more specific. What a heart attack is when you have damage to the heart muscle, the pump that pumps blood around your body, because of a sudden reduction in blood supply. And when you have a reduction in blood supply, the cells of that muscle, they get starved of oxygen and they die. And that cell death is known as a heart attack. When people look at the risk factors for heart disease, the major ones are hypertension or high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, smoking, and dyslipidemia, which essentially means that the cholesterol profile is something that makes it more likely to damage the arteries and cause buildup of deposits that lead to heart disease and heart attacks. But each of them, except for smoking, is very much linked to diet.
But the definition of a poor diet has been sorely misunderstood.
I completely agree with you. Absolutely. And that needs to be reversed. And actually what people don't realise is that the impacts in terms of heart disease from changing one's diet actually is very dramatic and very quick. Adopting these lifestyle changes can dramatically and rapidly reduce one's risk of having a heart attack, and even people who have established heart disease within weeks. I would say this can happen within 21 days.
So just as we're talking here, it brings my father to mind, and that's why I made my first movie, Serial Killers. And this was a man who was an elite athlete. He'd never really gained much weight. He'd sailed through what I believe you call stress tests, and boom, heart attack.
Actually, that's quite typical of what happens
We know about 50% of people who suffer heart attacks have no preceding warning or symptoms of what we call angina, which is a symptom of chest discomfort that people experience normally when they do exercise or stress and is relieved by rest. That usually happens when the artery is at least 70% narrowed physiologically. But what people don't realize is that most people who suffer what we call cardiac events often don't have significant narrowings up to 70%. They may be 30 or 40% or even 20% narrowed, in which case they're not going to get symptoms. But what happens is those underlying narrowings that may be minor suddenly block off with a clot because of inflammatory processes related to many things such as smoking, diet, stress. All these things come together almost like an explosion. You described it like an earthquake. It's absolutely right. There are 3 misconceptions about heart disease we have to deal with. The first misconception is that dietary fat causes narrowing or blockage of the artery. Dietary fat doesn't cause the narrowing, inflammation does. The second misconception is that the arterial narrowing itself is a problem. Well, in fact, the narrowing isn't what kills people. It's a sudden occlusion of that artery, the sudden blockage, because of this angry deposit of cholesterol and inflammatory cells that suddenly get exposed to the blood, causing a clot to form. The third misconception is that the reversal of the process that leads to heart attacks will take a long time. And that's incorrect. In fact, this can happen very rapidly. As you can see here, these are jagged edges on the inside of the artery, like an inflamed or angry narrowing. And what we need to do is we need to passivate, diffuse that anger. And you can diffuse it with dietary changes, smoking cessation, stress reduction, and doing the right type of exercise.
This is the greatest gym on the planet. We know all the benefits of being outside. We can get into the science of it, but this is it right here in reality. And we know that the 3 key factors when we're looking at, let's say, mobility into old age are flexibility, strength, and balance, all of which we can address right here. This creates an environment for proprioceptive training. So we're going to hit the biggest muscle in the body, which is the glute. And when we really drive it into that muscle through the appropriate form of exercise, we create a rush of testosterone and other lipolytic hormones which burn fat that you can't get from any other mechanism. Just relax the shoulders, breathe in, that's it, now you got it. And do not move until you feel perfectly poised to do so. Now let's just find the height, let's find the length before we find the depth. So think of a plumb line through the head, and really you want to keep the distance from the ear to the shoulder as lengthy as possible. You want to be nice and relaxed. So you're going to relax in the chest. T12 at the back here. This is where every bloke holds their stress. So we're going to be working that as well. So just relax that breathing that Louise showed you into the back of the chest and let it flow down through the feet. There you go. Beautiful. Stabilize before you move. When you come back up, stabilize, lengthen. Yeah, very nice. This is a fantastic balance challenge, something that a lot of people really struggle with. But if you brought kids up here, they would migrate to this because they love the fun and the enjoyment of hopping up on something like this and just seeing how far they can go.
Children move correctly from a very young age. They do the correct movement because it feels good.
After 5 or 6 years of freedom, modern society encourages us to take a seat for, about 70 years, and the results are devastating. A body that was born to move morphs into one that cannot. The seats and desks and props of civilization tell us that's okay, but it's not. Our body knows best, and it does not forget. We must simply learn to listen to it again. Whatever feels right, you're just operating purely on feeling here. Arthur Ashe gave us that great quote to keep the mind tight but the body loose, and that's what we're doing here. One of my favourite exercises, mate. We're going to really work the glutes. We're going to work the back line of the body, and the key thing is that we've got that back line, exactly where we want it to create a position of power to protect the back, and then we engage the glutes. And we've got 4 different types of muscle fibers. They're like gears of the car, though you can't go straight to number 4. When you jog or walk, you're on 1. Most people who run might get to 2. They never see 3 or 4. You'll get that from sprinting, which we know can be hectic on the body. It's a great way to cut yourself up. But let's face it, not everybody should be sprinting. This type of exercise done to what we call a Tabata protocol will give you all of those benefits. So you'll get a great afterburn effect, they call that the epoch effect, and you'll also work every major muscle group in the body. But we do that within 4 minutes. It's 20 seconds of exercise, 10 seconds rest, and we do it 8 times. So 160 seconds of work. When we conduct this type of training, the body is moving into a fat-burning state for a much longer period of time. In fact, they believe up to 24 hours after the exercise intervention has taken place. And relax. So there's no question that high-intensity interval training should be at the top of your list. Now, that means different things for different people. What it must mean is a full-body compound movement. A bit different than a 5K run, eh?
Yeah.
No, well done, that's a great start.
I'm responsible for writing all this, and I don't believe it anymore. I think it's very important exercise because I think it keeps the whole system working. But in the face of insulin resistance, it doesn't help if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet. And I was the classic example, 70 marathons, insulin resistant, 33 years eating a high carbohydrate diet. I still got type 2 diabetes.
Insulin is a hormone that's produced by the pancreas from the beta cells, and the function of that hormone is to control glucose levels.
Insulin resistance is the disease we're dealing with. It's not heart disease and diabetes and obesity and cancer and even dementia. I think the underlying condition that combines all of those conditions is insulin resistance.
In easy terms, insulin resistance is that your body stops responding to insulin. The muscles are supposed to take up more glucose when the glucose levels rise, but because they are insulin resistant, the insulin doesn't seem to work properly on the muscles and the glucose levels doesn't get taken up properly into the muscles.
As we age, we naturally become more insulin resistant. We lose our ability to synthesize protein as effectively. We become more immobile and we start to lose muscle through a process called sarcopenia, all of which we can address. We can't halt them, but we can certainly slow them down. The average male in Pioppi is living to 89 and they're actually outliving their female counterparts, and they've got 9 years on some of the longest lived populations elsewhere in the world.
Some people, as we know in Pioppi, who live well over the age of 100 and still very physically and mentally agile.
The Dalai Lama said sleep is the best meditation. And we now know that quality sleep improves insulin sensitivity and hormonal balance within the body. Of course, they would not have known this in Pioppi, but they weren't taking any chances. It's siesta time.
Up, on your feet, let's go, get up. You've been sitting for 48 minutes. It's time for you to move. You are becoming more insulin resistant. Your hip flexors are tightening. Your posture is collapsing. Remember, movement is medicine. Okay, let's settle down. Settle down. Here is part 3.
The healthiest foods you can eat, the ones that are going to have the biggest impacts on reducing your risk of heart disease, of stroke, even cancers, is one that incorporates Mediterranean type food but is higher in fat.
Well, we've got some amazing lamb here from the Karoo, which is a region in South Africa where you get some of the finest lamb, and for me it's some of the best lamb in the world, and that's what the chefs tell me here.
So I'm going to make a lamb curry tonight, so I'd like to buy some meat.
We've got some lamb neck. Most people do shank or shoulder or something, but for me this is just the ultimate cut for a long, sort of slow braising kind of technique.
I'm told the Karoo lamb is some of the best in the world.
Yeah, Karoo lamb, obviously something South Africans are very passionate about. For me, it's a provenance brand, you know, the same way champagne or cognac would be a provenance brand. It comes with a stamp and we know that it came from that geographical area, but more importantly we know what it ate, so a very particular mix of like natural vegetation. There's a huge checklist that we go through to be able to call something Karoo lamb.
So how easy is it to get sort of good locally sourced food and products in Cape Town?
Pretty easy. Have you seen my garden?
You know what, that's a good point. You grow some of your own vegetables, don't you?
Yeah. We eat a lot from the garden. We eat a lot of spinach and the rocket and the herbs. So, you know how you said cooking was like your therapy? Gardening and nourishing and having a kind of a communication cycle with your own food that you make, that you eat, that you plant. I've quite enjoyed that.
Let's grab some base for your curry here, eh? Local markets are a great opportunity to put a face to the food we eat, and every city and town has them. We should get out there and get involved more. These are local farmed oysters. You like it spicy, eh?
Love it spicy.
Hi, Julie.
Hi.
What have you got for us today that's fresh?
I've got some lovely fresh yellowtail that's just come in. Tuna, angelfish, salmon and hake.
We'll take 3 portions of the yellowtail, but this is a sustainable fish.
The yellowtail that I buy is all caught on the line, all caught by local fishermen, and it's currently seasoned, so there's quite a lot around.
What's the difference between a line-caught fish and a fish caught in a net?
Line fishing, it's a fisherman with a line, so there's no other fish. They don't catch other fish by mistake. If a fish is caught in a net, there's a good chance that they will have bycatch or catch other sea creatures that they're not supposed to be catching.
I'd love your advice on how best to cook that.
For such a beautiful piece of fish, I think just pan frying in a bit of butter. Awesome. A little bit of lemon juice, salt and pepper, and there you go.
Pretty simple.
Yeah, we like butter.
We like butter.
We know from good quality studies that actually having oily fish, certainly with people with established heart disease, very powerful in reducing death rates. And it's the anti-inflammatory properties of these fish.
You get you up on this log, your stress level has actually been reduced. And as Laurie explains, it's the 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, which you find in yoga, Pilates, a lot of the movement disciplines. They know that that's the breath that centers and stabilizes and drops the stress levels in the body. Okay, let's give it a go. Know where your body is. It's a perfectly natural movement. This is a different body than we saw on the first day. Keep the throat relaxed. Oh. Oof. Another very effective form of exercise is isometric training. And this training was used as a mechanism by the original bodybuilders because they didn't have weights and whatnot 100 years ago at their disposal like we do today. And what they would do was they would grab a chair and they would hold it until the arm gave out. And this has been proven to be very, very effective in the development of lean muscle mass. It also proves that you do not need equipment to build muscle mass. Our own body weight is the ultimate piece of equipment, and we can enhance that with everyday objects. There's no need to actually buy equipment. Find that same position. Isometric training spikes the blood pressure very, very aggressively. So it is an advanced form of training, but you can achieve an incredible response in an absolutely minimal period of time. Everybody wants up front, but you got to work that back now. Awesome. So that was great. Smoked angelfish, mackerel, charcuteries, and all the pasture-raised products from Richard Bosman.
This is where I drown it.
So tip forward because
in olive oil.
Yeah.
That olive oil is probably the best we've found, Asim, in South Africa. It's from a very, very small farm, not that far from here. But there's a huge issue around the quality of olive oil, and there's been an enormous scam for years. They worked out in the States, and here in fact, something like 95% of extra virgin olive oil imported was not extra virgin.
This tastes like a fat bomb. What is in it?
Lots of olive oil.
Where do you source the olive oil?
This particular olive oil comes from the Karoo, a place called Prince Albert. It's quite well known for its olives and olive oil, and it's quite a strong, robust oil that's not as fruity as some of the Mediterranean olive oils, but, you know, it's delicious.
First and foremost, for me, and for what I advise my patients in the staples part of their diet, they should have at least 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil daily. And that's because studies have shown that in people who are at risk of heart disease, who are diabetic in particular, the risk of having a heart attack, stroke or death is significantly reduced if they follow that guidance. But we have to be very specific as well, in that people should be aware of the quality of the olive oil they're getting. The cold-pressed extra virgin, the one that's higher in polyphenols and hydroxytyrosol, that's where you get most of the anti-inflammatory benefits that are going to reduce your risk of having a heart attack. So, consumption of extra virgin olive oil, what it does is it gradually reduces the angriness or the inflammation, douses the fire, douses the flames of that fire within the artery, and therefore makes it less likely to cause that sudden occlusion or, if you like, an explosion that leads to a heart attack. Coconut oil has had a lot of bad press, but in fact, actually, I would say it's a superfood. It's 90% saturated fat, but what's interesting about coconut oil, and I found this in my own experience, is it actually preferentially raises significantly what we call the HDL, or good cholesterol, in the body. And for the last 3 months or so, I've been having regular extra virgin coconut oil in my coffee every morning, and I also cook my eggs in it. And what I found is that my cholesterol profile is actually better than it's ever been. And my total cholesterol to HDL ratio, which is what doctors use to try and calculate your risk of heart disease and stroke in the next 10 years, is better than it's ever been. It's dropped from 3.5 to 2.7, so I'm actually very pleased with that. I cook in butter quite a lot. I also have butter in my coffee every morning. The grass-fed butter in particular contains vitamin K2, and there's some good epidemiological data that suggests that high intakes of vitamin K2 can reduce heart disease and heart attack.
Antonio used a lot of olive oil in his cooking, I see. Are you going to use some here?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually use a mixture of olive oil and butter. It goes very well, gives it good flavour.
And of course, the combination of butter and olive oil is fantastic for cooking, and I remember an Italian chef friend of mine had told me that he used it because it allows the greater stability at higher temperatures. There's a perception that olive oil absolutely deteriorates at very high temperatures. It seems to be, if you mix it with butter, you never really reach that.
Absolutely. There's some emerging scientific evidence that's telling us that cooking in vegetable oils could actually be very harmful, because what happens when you cook vegetable oils at high temperatures, they produce these toxic chemicals called aldehydes that have been strongly linked to cancer, dementia, and heart disease.
Andy, can I ask you to differentiate the meat we see here from the meat that we see on supermarket shelves?
Yeah, the difference with us really is that we buy meat directly from the farm. So we curate a couple of farmers we want to work with around the country. And then I personally visit the farm to check out the welfare of the animals, but more importantly, the diet, what they're eating, and also how they're living.
Firstly, we'll call ourselves grass farmers, and we use a mob grazing system to graze our cattle. It's what we call a lot of animals on a small space for a short period of time. So in theory, we want to replicate what happened on the savannas with the migration of the big herds of wildebeest, buffalo and zebra, where you had the lions and the predators keeping these packs closely kept together, and as they migrated across, they used to clean up. So there's an equal chance of competition for everything to regrow. And as you're walking over, you're also flattening anything that was left. At the same time, urine patties are being dropped, that's natural fertilizer back into your swale. You get a complete fresh growth coming through.
The whole concept we're following is biomimicking. We're mimicking what happens in nature. So we've got the cattle coming through, and then the chickens come through, and they're kind of the cleanup team. They also spread the manure out a bit, so you just get much more ingredients for the microbes in the soil to work with to recreate this.
So these would be referred to as pasture-raised chickens?
That's correct, yeah. I'm glad you didn't say free range, because free range is also a very bent term, but yeah, pasture-raised is exactly what they're doing now. They're walking on the pastures, they get their feed from the pastures. They live in these cages at night time, and we basically move these every day, the length of the coop. So
I'm getting packed.
The floors are made of welded mesh. When the chickens do go in at night time, the chicken manure still falls through, and it kind of fertilizes the area that they're in. So we are basically fertilizing the pasture as the chickens go. So we're not spending money on artificial fertilizers.
I think this batch of eggs are from the hen that pecked me in the arse at Usana, so this is revenge. Key ingredient, eggs, and I would defy anyone to start with a blank page and create a better food.
Absolutely. In fact, that's what I'm telling my patients, because I can now confidently tell them that, you know, the cholesterol in the egg yolk, which was previously vilified, doesn't affect blood cholesterol. In fact, US dietary guidelines have now lifted cholesterol as a nutrient of concern. They contain 9 essential amino acids. The egg yolk is actually very nutritious. It has omega-3 fatty acids, it has vitamin D, it has choline, which is also an essential nutrient.
I know you're a fan of cheese. I find this fantastic little treasure trove here in Cape Town. So I'm keen to introduce you to some of the local fare.
So I've got 6 cheeses here, 5 of them unpasteurized, 1 of them is pasteurized.
Where would you recommend we start here?
I would recommend to start not where you just started, which is the 7-year-old oldest cheese, but it doesn't really matter. Most important thing is to enjoy a cheese platter. A lot of cheeses in the supermarket may be processed. They may be from a milk source that you don't know where the milk has come from. You don't know what the cows have been fed or how the cows have been looked after. So grass-fed cheese is going to have a lot higher nutritional value than certain supermarket cheeses that have been through a lot of processing that takes away a lot of the natural goodness in the cheese. And it's not just the goodness, but it's also the flavour.
Whoa, I'm getting a chill down my spine from that. That is sensational. Next.
Maybe go for this one, actually. These two are sort of similar strength, different types of strength. You've got real pungent areas around there. That's gooey and rich and smelly. So you've got very lactic cheese in the middle, then creamy and rich and pungent on the outside. When that's older, it's a real stinker. It's a real smelly cheese.
It smells like bad feet and tastes magnificent.
Well, Brevibacterium is a family of bacteria that lives on your feet. So it's no surprise that Brevibacterium on cheese has similar sort of smells to bad feet. But it's not the same bacteria, but it's the same family of bacteria. But perfectly safe to eat.
Cheeses have all different types of fats, and actually cholesterol within the cheese is quite high. Yeah. But we now know that cholesterol in food doesn't actually influence your blood cholesterol. Listen to that. As part of a heart-healthy diet, I advise my cardiac patients to enjoy full-fat cheese. As part of, you know, with olive oil and the vegetables and everything else. But you should see the look on their face when I tell them.
Oh, that's an awesome.
And if there was one food on this table that you could, I'm going to discount the olive oil, but if there was one food on this table that you would use and encourage people to consume regularly to improve their heart health, what would it be?
I would definitely say nuts. We know that regular nut consumption has already been linked to reducing incidence of dementia, but what many people don't realise is actually, if it's been calculated, that the whole entire American population were to increase their nut consumption by 2 portions a week, that would prevent 90,000 deaths from cardiovascular disease within 1 year.
Are nuts, what kind of impact do they have on the body?
Well, what nuts contain are fatty acids, which we know that rapidly reduce inflammation and the likelihood of thrombosis or clots forming in the body.
One of my real favourite takeaways from Pioppi was the espresso bar, and coffee has been it's been pitched as a bad guy. It's almost like butter in that respect for a long time, but things seem to be changing, and I'm just wondering, is it one of those nuggets of the Mediterranean lifestyle that we should be incorporating wherever we are?
If you look at the totality of the evidence in terms of health benefits, it's quite clear that there's a very strong association with having coffee and reduction in cardiovascular death and all-cause mortality. So the benefits are believed to be there because coffee is high in antioxidants, but also the data suggests it improves glucose metabolism, thus decreasing the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And the current data suggests that the optimum level of coffee consumption is about 3 to 5 cups a day.
One of the other little hacks that athletes have been using for some time now is raw cacao. And of course, nowadays, you get some fantastic, very high-grade dark chocolate.
Coffee and chocolate go fantastically well together. They're quite similar in flavors and profiles, and the intensities match quite well. And often, the chocolate will soften a coffee and bring out notes of the coffee, as it does with wine and other drinks we've found.
There's a plausible biological explanation to explain why people who consume chocolate tend to have reduced mortality based upon observational studies. And it's because of its ability to be an endothelial vasodilator. So essentially it relaxes some of the peripheral arteries and peripheral arterioles. So that's likely where the benefits lie in the consumption of chocolate.
And I think people need to understand very clearly the difference between the cacao content and the sugar content of bars, because you could have a milk chocolate that is 10% cacao and it's loaded with sugar. But something like this, once you get up into the 85% plus range, the level of sugar drops dramatically, and there's actually half as much sugar in an 85% cacao bar as there would be even in a 70% bar. So I would try and get people to go 85 and beyond. I always look at sugar on a table and it reminds me of a cigarette. And I think that's probably a credible comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's actually, we describe sugar as a new tobacco. I think the focus incorrectly being on saturated fat as the #1 cause of heart disease detracted from what, in my view, is now public enemy #1 in the Western diet, sugar.
Type 2 diabetes, it's insulin-resistant diabetes, which is the term we use. Really what it means is that the cells of the body are not responding to insulin very well. So the liver doesn't respond to insulin, so it keeps producing too much glucose. So your glucose levels raise up, and in fact that's when you start to be called diabetic, because you'll reach a level of fasting glucose of, say, 7, and that's a definition for diabetes. It also can't control your glucose levels when you eat carbohydrates, because those glucose levels spike, and it takes a long time for insulin then to control the glucose levels and bring them down again. So that's essentially what's happening when the system doesn't work so well.
I understand that in your own life that you may have been insulin resistant at a much younger age than you'd realize.
Yes, indeed. It was a paper we published in the Journal of Physiology in 1980. So it was work that was done on me in 1978 when I was 28 years old. On the day we'd had the real carbohydrate loading, my insulin was 40 units.
40?
40 units.
Wow.
And that is overnight and not having eaten for 8 or 12 hours.
Wow.
So therefore, I had 4 times the normal value for insulin. So I was insulin resistant at 28. And had I known, I would have picked it up then. So a lot of people, when I came out, thought, oh, your diabetes was caused by that high-fat diet. Oh, hold on. It wasn't. It was present long before.
In terms of, can anybody get diabetes? I think it is possible. For instance, in the 1960s, George Campbell, who was a doctor in Natal, he was looking at patients amongst the Zulus and Indian population who were developing type 2 diabetes. And there was this huge increase in type 2 diabetes. Obviously, with the sugar plantations coming online, and in fact, many of the laborers were paid in sugar. He then looked at their intake of sugar, and he found that in basically diabetes-naive populations, people who'd never had diabetes before, that it took about, he calculated, it took about 70 pounds of sugar a year for 20 years to become a diabetic. If you take that down and you work it out, it's basically 22 teaspoons of sugar a day for 20 years, and you'll become a diabetic.
22 teaspoons of sugar a day
Yes.
for 20 years?
Yes.
The current dietary advice on sugar, both in the UK and in Europe, was advising people to consume 22.5 teaspoons of sugar a day.
That's incredible. And you know how easy it is to get 22 teaspoons of sugar in your diet? I mean, if you add cereal and fruit juice and bread, and I mean, people are having 50 teaspoons a day.
You have seen patients in your own practice reverse diabetes?
Absolutely. If I diagnose diabetes today and they've got an HbA1c of 11%, and we check HbA1cs every 3 months, I've seen a number who will, by 3 months, having cut the carbs and really being careful about their glucose levels, their HbA1cs will be down to 6.2% after 3 months. That must be a significant improvement. There's no medication that does that.
What's very interesting is pre-1970s, type 2 diabetes was often referred to a disease of carbohydrate intolerance.
It was called carbohydrate intolerance before the 1960s. I've read a few things. So there's no doubt we need to look at it from a different point of view.
We're just taking the challenge up a notch. So you got to respond to me, I've got to respond to you. And again, that's a feeling, we're communicating through the log. And this is the resistance training. It's more effective than any other form of exercise for increasing insulin sensitivity. So it's just a very, very effective.
Tougher than the other one.
Yeah.
Research has shown that the most effective exercise is actually resistance training. So regular resistance probably is better than aerobic exercise in terms of utilizing glucose.
So this is special for us. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here, Bill.
No, thank you. Very special for us.
This is great. Thanks for inviting us.
Fantastic. I gave up.
I just saw the cover of your book on longevity. What are some of the secrets? Did you uncover some of them?
Well, one secret is that anybody who tells you they have the secret is probably trying to sell you the secret. Secret I found. Gardening actually is a pretty good one.
And Marilyn, you do a lot of gardening, don't you?
I do.
Yeah. So you spend a lot of time outside.
Yeah, but actually physically bending and cutting and pruning.
So you're always moving around. And,
And Prof, that's your new job, isn't it?
Well,
Assistant gardener.
I'm glad you mentioned the word assistant, because this is a race in which I cannot keep up.
It's ticking a lot of boxes. There's vitamin D there. There's some squatting, mobilizing the joints.
But one interesting thing I found when I was researching aging, exercise has a whole range of benefits that are totally independent of calorie burning. They have nothing to do with calories.
You know, I think that the calorie story for exercise begins with Ken Cooper in the 1960s. And he was the first guy to come along and say that you could quantify how much benefit you got. And so you had Cooper points, or aerobic points. Yeah, and that was a real change, because before that it was working out in the gym and getting big and muscular that was healthy for you. But he came along and said, no, it was aerobic cardiovascular exercise that you needed. And you had to get 30 Cooper points a week. And that really changed everything. And then we had the aerobics explosion in the 70s and the 80s, and running became very popular. But I think what happened was it didn't produce the results people wanted. They still got fat. And so we've still got this growing obesity problem, despite all the exercise. And we've realized that because that's not the solution, that it's what you put in your mouth that's rather more important than how much exercise you're doing.
Yeah.
And of course, we were heavily criticized for our article because it was suggesting that you shouldn't exercise. We never said that. We just said, let's get the focus right. If you want to be healthy, and if you want to prevent diabetes and obesity, you've got to make sure you don't eat the wrong foods.
Sure. There was a guy at Stanford, John Ioannidis, who did a comparison of clinical trials of exercise versus clinical trials of prescription drugs against a whole range of conditions, against statins, blood pressure drugs, stroke, diabetes. And in just about every case, exercise did as well or better.
You're absolutely right. And in fact, that's even when we take the published medical literature at face value. And in fact, I personally think that, you know, a lot of that stuff, we know there's a lot of data that doesn't get published, and these studies are funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So, you know, and that's even when we take that data at face value, which has probably been exaggerated, which suggests actually the benefits of lifestyle changes such as exercise is even stronger, I'm sure.
Yeah. And let's not forget, my opinion is that the drugs are having such a poor effect anyway. So whatever does something is going to be better than the drugs. You know?
Yeah. Really rotate, 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 rotate. Nice.
How's your body feeling?
Pretty good, actually.
Yeah. We're 20 days in, aren't we?
Yeah, and when I got here, I was holding a lot of tension in the bottom of my spine, and having gone through different types of movement, which I wouldn't normally do, I'm feeling a lot more flexible, I'm feeling stronger, I'm feeling my balance is better.
You're doing the right kind of movement.
Yeah.
You're focusing on flexibility, strength, and balance.
Relax the shoulders, soften the throat. Very nice line, very nice line.
So when you first arrived here, you had a great amount of tension in the seat of your pelvis.
Yes.
Which comes from quite a bit of sitting and quite a bit of static postures. And movement really does heal. Movement, food, and sleep are medicine. Every time you move, you floss your nerves. Every time you move your spine, you massage your organs. Every time you move muscles and joints, you're circulating blood. So we've really got your system moving in a natural way.
Dig in, dig in, dig in. Better. Yeah, keep going, breathe. Relax, 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 relax.
Wow.
You have not got this far walking forward, so breathe it, relax. Plumb line through the top of the head. You're solving it with the back line. Look at that posture. Really, really nice posture. There we go, look at that.
Holy Mother of God.
How'd that feel?
Good.
You've taken it further backwards than you have forwards.
I think it's very important to exercise.
These days, going to work is like going to war.
I think one of the key things of the Mediterranean diet is the variety of food.
Key ingredient, egg.
The olive oil actually soaks into the cheese when you cook it.
Mobility is hugely important.
We use extra virgin olive oil.
What nuts contain are fatty acids.
And another interesting thing is the oily fish.
The scientific evidence is very clear that adopting a lifestyle that involves a high-fat Mediterranean diet, movement, stress reduction, and stopping smoking is more powerful than any drug in preventing heart disease, treating heart disease, and improving one's physical state, emotional state, mental state, and longevity.
In Italy, in Cilento, in Pollica, we have a treasure.
Ted.
Hello, Steve.
Ah, nice one. How's it going?
Good, thank you, yeah.
Awesome. So, when you came to see me, you'd consider yourself maybe not leading the most healthy lifestyle in terms of...
I was completely led by my schedule as far as work is concerned, and it was what was easiest at the time, so I was very much in the toast and cereal for breakfast camp, and then...
What did you change that to? Was it kind of eggs, avocado?
My breakfast in the morning would be four scrambled eggs, probably with some coconut oil thrown in.
Okay.
Well, handling them.
And then, obviously, with the exercise, you were doing different things as well in terms of just a lot of movement.
It was all weight.
Right.
But keeping the rest periods really short and really strict, so that we were getting that peaks and troughs in my heart rate.
Do you remember the measurements on your waist circumference, what they went from to, or the body fat percentage?
I lost 11 centimetres.
11 centimetres around the waist, wow. Okay, that's quite a lot. Yeah. Wow, okay.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. It's quantifiably showing this stuff works.